This is 416 and continuing with North by Northwest. Alright, so the second sequence ends with the scene of aftermath in which a drunk Thornhill tries to explain to the police what just happened. This sets up a new tension for the sequence, a comic tension. Comic tension is built around the juxtaposition of two wildly different elements. This causes a discrepancy between what is presented, a man tells the judge a comically outrageous story that no one believes, and the reality, the story is actually true. We hope that he can convince them of the truth, but fear that he will only face deeper humiliation, as the facts presented don't match his story. But this is important because if we're to understand why Thornhill continually makes matters worse, we have to understand his humiliation, his desperate urge to prove he's not just a drunk. The second sequence ends when the tension surrounding the question, will he get the police to believe his story, is answered with a definitive no. And then, just in case even the audience was beginning to doubt Thornhill, we get a juicy reveal of the henchman, assuring us of the irony that his story is true. The third sequence is built around a mystery tension. Mystery presents the audience with a question that needs to be answered. In this case, who is this guy Kaplan that Thornhill was mistaken for? It's a sequence about sneaking in and finding clues and giving Thornhill the chance to play act Kaplan. The mystery tension continues as he goes to the United Nations building only to discover Townsend is not the man who abducted him and that the villains themselves were play acting. But the answers to the Kaplan mystery are withheld as Thornhill is framed for murder. So as Thornhill flees the scene, the first act essentially ends. Thornhill is locked in. And by that I mean that there is no going back to his ordinary life with his mother and his many bartenders. Now his goal of clearing his name isn't just a matter of pride, he's now a fugitive. But the second act doesn't really start until the main tension is established. The main tension is the primary hope and fear that the audience feels over the entire second act. To establish the main tension, we need the abrupt and slightly disorienting shift of point of view to a CIA conference room. Here we get our first big revelation, that Kaplan does not exist. Thornhill's moment of recognition, finally discovering what we already know, won't happen until much later when the second act ends. The scene then serves up a healthy dose of exposition delivered through conflict, as the agents argue over what to do about poor Thornhill. And this allows them to helpfully express the main tension out loud, or at least what the audience will fear. Who will kill him first, Van Damme and company or the police? The scene ends with a bit of advertising, as an agent predicts the likely outcome. Goodbye, Mr. Thornhill, wherever you are. As the long train sequence begins, we are back with Thornhill. As he explains what has happened to him to his mother, we have a moment of recapitulation, or recap. Thornhill gives the audience a little refresher on the plot, just so the audience understands clearly what his predicament is and what he plans to do about it. He also clearly states his want. He wants to find Kaplan, the man he was mistaken for. Now the second act can truly launch. The protagonist is locked in, his want is clear, the main tension is established, and over the next 4 sequences, we hope that Thornhill will discover what we already know, that there is no Kaplan. And we hope that he does this before he is caught by the police or killed by the villains. The train sequence itself is over 20 minutes long and has its own 3-part structure. So, his first problem is getting on the train. He faces obstacles in the form of a nosy ticket salesman, the police who chase him, and a blonde who literally obstructs his path, but then switches from being an obstacle to an ally. When he finally sits down with Eve for lunch, the central tension of the sequence is established. The scene provides a classic example of subtext as the dialogue playfully dances around what their expressions make obvious. It's also a classic example of a plant, as Thornhill explains his monogrammed matchbook and then lights her cigarette, so to speak. The key here is that the meaning of the matchbook is sexual and alluring and part of this scene entirely. It in no way gives away that we will ever see the big O matchbook again later. But to skip ahead, it does come back, in a completely different context with a completely different meaning. But back to the train. The scenes here are full of irony and subtext, as what characters say is completely at odds with what we know to be true. We won't get into the hero's journey until about week 4, But Eve is a perfect example of what Joseph Campbell called a shapeshifter. A character who seems to be one thing, but then seems to morph into something completely different. And one has to wonder why Thornhill doesn't realize that his Angel of Mercy has a hidden agenda. The way the screenwriter deals with this is the character points out the logical inconsistency, and the audience mostly buys it because Cary Grant was such a big star at the time that most people could imagine a beautiful blonde throwing themselves at him on a train. The cutaway to the exterior of the train is a perfect example of ellipses, in which the audience is led to fill in the gap with whatever they imagine Eve and Thornhill doing together. By stimulating the audience's imagination, ellipses deepen an audience's engagement. There's another cute plant and payoff with the little razor, by the way. In the first scene, when he is alone, it's a comic curiosity. The prop is the joke. In the second scene, a man shaving watches him, and now he is the butt of the joke. Okay, getting back to structure, when Eve sends her note and we reveal that she is working for Van Damme, we get the first culmination of the second act. It's a major revelation for the audience, and the stakes have doubled because the villains, whom we haven't even seen for a while, are suddenly back on his heels. And the tension tightens because poor Thornhill has no idea that the woman he has just fallen for is apparently a femme fatale. So it's a revelation stacked on a twist, stacked on a raising of the stakes. It makes things a lot worse for our protagonists, which are all sort of symptoms of the first culmination. All right, in this three-part sequence, Thornhill has gotten on the train. He has evaded the police and stayed on the train, and now he has to get off the train. So the next morning, there's a nice hook when we see Thornhill in a Red Caps uniform, and we are made curious about how he got it. Later, there's a satisfying reveal of the answer. Now, this isn't really a plant and payoff because there's no major shift in context creating a new meaning for the uniform. This is just a little mystery that gets solved with a reveal. Notice that there is another ellipsis when Eve speaks with Leonard on the phone. We don't hear what the plan is and have to imagine what it might be. The final conversation that ends the train sequence is filled with more dramatic irony, as Thornhill has no idea that Eve is sending him to his death. However, there's a great example of a brief moment where the camera is alone with Eve. From her expression, we see that she wants to run after him and warn him, and she struggles to hold herself back. Often in movies, characters behave one way when other characters are around, but then behave in different and revealing ways when they are alone. The special access the audience gets to these private moments is called a window into the soul. All right, I'll end this video here, and in the next one, we'll start with the crop duster sequence.